Thank you, everybody, for joining us. The topic, to make sure you're in the right room, is the talent crisis. And how can we develop strategies and operational plans for attacking the talent crisis and include everybody in the pipeline as well. And so I'd like to start just to develop a backdrop here, if you would bring up slide number 2. So we have been hearing, and I did a Google search since I think the first report came out in 2012 in a Forbes article about the talent crisis. And you're going to hear a lot of exactly what's been in these articles for years, but nobody's been doing anything about. I think in July 2013, it stated that the economy would face a shortage of up to 5 million people in 2020. And what you can see up here is the numbers now are quoted as, I believe it's 1.5 million in terms of a shortage of tech talent. So that's the bad news and the good news, because it's really both. Obviously, we have jobs. We're all looking for jobs. We're looking to make sure that we have jobs for everybody. The best news about this is look at the numbers on the right-hand side. These are good paying jobs, not just minimum wage jobs. So again, that's really, really good news. The problem is we're not even close to having the people that are fully skilled to fill these jobs. And so that's why we're here today. And we've assembled a panel of experts on the topic that are going to join us. You guys know that the bios are all in your packets, so we're not going to provide background on anybody, but I would like to jump right into the conversation. And Frida Caper-Klein and I have known each other for a long time, and Frida is referred to by Van Jones as the mother of dealing with diversity. I heard him say this yesterday. And so Frida, could you talk to us a little bit about, I mean, you've been in this longer than anybody else, looking at the problem of how do we bring more people into the tech space. So it's not just a diversity discussion, it's not just a talent crisis discussion, it's a both discussion. How do we get everybody in? Give us a little background.
Well, I've been working on this a long time, partly because I'm really old. And sometimes Van says mother with another word following it, sometimes not. So what I want to talk about is we keep hearing that we have a pipeline problem in this country. And yes, and. So one of the things I want to talk about is slide 3 says that this is the first year in U.S. history that students, K-12 students, are students of color. So for everybody who's been equating diversity in tech means white women, you're missing the boat. And that has been the framing of the issue for a very long time. And so if we're going to look at the numbers, let's look at who our kids are. So it's not a big debate about who the future workforce is. The future workforce is in school now. They're in K-12. Some of those kids are 12th graders and are going to be going to college in the fall and are going to, in the fall, be looking for an internship for their first summer, sometimes in a tech company, sometimes in another kind of company. So then the next piece of the pipeline problem is if you take a look at slide 4, if we could have that one, please. So this is the other piece of the pipeline problem. You've got a majority of kids of color, but you don't have anywhere near the representation you need taking AP computer science. So who took that exam? This is for 2014. This is the most recent data available. So you had 0 African Americans taking that exam in 12 of 50 states. You had 0 Latinos taking that exam in 7 states. You have 0 women, half the population, high school girls, taking the exam in 2 states. That's the part that there is a real pipeline problem. The Level Playing Field Institute is a nonprofit that I started in 2001. It will be releasing a report May 7th called Path Not Found, which is an analysis of access to computer science in California public schools. And let me say that access to computer science, and especially AP computer science, completely tracks by race. And so we have nothing like a meritocracy in our school system, which means we have nothing like a meritocracy in our companies. So we have basically a rounding error of the 560,000 plus California high school students in the largest 20 districts. We have a rounding error of students taking AP Computer Science. So that has to be fixed. There's great news if you are an entrepreneur, and the other hat I wear is as a partner at Capor Capital, and we invest in entrepreneurs who take on problems like this and come up with different solutions. And guess what? Our entrepreneurs, about half are underrepresented people of color and women from various backgrounds, and that's not an accident. And they have world-class businesses. They are looking at problems from their lived experience. On the next slide up there, my last one.
Can I compare this to one thing, though? Because I think it's an interesting comparison. Because a lot of people would wrongly frame computer science as math. Well, therefore, of course, you know, if you want to wrongly frame it. But when you actually compare it to AP Statistics, AP Biology, AP Calculus,
Right.
you see 50-50 boys, girls by comparison. And so it's rather stark that computer science, by contrast, becomes this uniquely white male background. And what that translates into the future, because when you look at incoming hires into technology fields, 90% of them learned about computer science before they got to college. And so clearly they're learning as a kid that it's a field that is interesting and that evolves for them going forward. And so I think it's an interesting comparison to highlight how stark the problem is that you're highlighting.
In computer science. But let me say that the 50-50 representation on gender doesn't hold to the right
For
representation for African American and Latino, Latina. So unless we need to get used to talking about the full dimension of the problem every place it goes. So when we talk about a pipeline problem, we also talk about a leaky pipeline and all the places along the way that kids fall off track. Many people have talked about sort of you're born into, we're all accidents of birth, okay? Nobody can take credit for the circumstances into which they are born, and we should stop taking credit for what we have achieved when we were on a path that was the norm and not the exception. So we talk about looking at distance traveled. We talk about rejecting a traditional looking resume. We talk about how far did you get under your own steam and what's your lived experience that powers your idea for a startup. But if you look all along here, and we're going to be releasing an interactive website with several dozen of these leaks in the hopes that foundations, companies, people will embrace solving one of these leaks. But what Pygmalion effect is teacher bias, teacher expectations, social belonging exercises, role models, resume bias, and then you have people of color are 3.5 times more likely to leave a corporation solely due to perceived unfairness. And we're not talking about filing lawsuits here. We're just leaving, walking out the door.
Okay. And beside embracing the leaks, the other thing that we have to embrace is the fact that 20 years ago when we talked about tech companies, we could all identify what a tech company was. And today, essentially every company is a tech company. There aren't companies out there anymore, which that has helped create a vast number of jobs that we didn't have before. Byron was working in the White House, I think, when I first met you. And you have now launched a new organization. Can you talk to us about opportunity at work?
Yeah, absolutely. If you move to slide 13, might tell the story a bit. So, Frida, I think the leaky pipeline is a great metaphor, and I think it's incredibly important to address this issue from the very beginning in our schools and in how our children are taught to perceive what they can do. But part of their perception of what they can do is what they see people around them doing, their parents doing, adults doing. And the three things I would like you all to take away from this discussion is first of all to broaden your view of what a tech job is and where it is and the possibilities, and to understand that there are millions more people than you probably think who could actually be great at tech jobs and sort of help fill that gap. Second, that the skills gap in tech jobs is driven partially by the education system, but actually it's driven mostly by employer behavior, how employers screen, how they hire, who they hire, how they train, who they train, and that there are a lot, and how they use technology actually. Do they use it to accelerate learning, or do they use it to automate tasks, right? And then the third thing I'd like you to take away is that bias is costly in dollars and cents, and actually approaching this market and the potential of talent in an unbiased way, both across gender, race, and in fact, even kind of formal education and class markers actually will make you money if you do it right, and that you are losing money by not doing it right. So that's what I want to get to. This slide, in addition to the one that Lisa showed at the beginning, just shows that really 2 out of 3 tech jobs are not in the tech industry, right? So if you want to talk about where you're doing computer programming or network administration, or all of those good middle class or upper middle class jobs that Lisa showed before, about 1/3 of them in tech, 2/3 of them are outside. And that's important because when you look at the behaviors that drive the skills gap, it's not just the behavior of a Google or a Yahoo or an Intel, it's the behavior of a State Farm Insurance or Mount Sinai Hospital or any number of other institutions that are far less sophisticated about this discussion in a way. They may not be any further behind, but they are not living and breathing kind of this problem all the time. Next slide. So how is this generated? Hiring, training, and the use of technology. You've got some names up there of institutions that we're working with at Opportunity at Work to sort of address this in the IT market, but it actually applies across the board in skills. So first of all, who you hire. Are you hiring based on mastery, or are you hiring based on history? Right? By hiring based on history, I mean what degrees do you have, what jobs have you done, et cetera. By mastery, I mean can you code? Can you work in a team? Can you actually do the job that we're hiring you for? And now it may seem obvious that you would want to do the latter, but in fact, most HR processes are all about the former, right? If you want to know if someone can code, do you look at their resume, their transcript, or their code? Might be obvious that you'd want to look at their code, but 98% of companies are looking at the other things and screening people out first. We'll see in a minute that costs money. On training, if these jobs are so valuable, and they absolutely are, and someone has the aptitude, right, and the motivation to master them, we should not ever be in a situation where that someone can't get that training. That is sort of completely counterproductive for society, and yet we're in that situation all the time. Got to fix that. And not just for kids, right? For adults, there's 150 million people in the job market right now. A few million of them could be great tech workers, have no path to get there right now. We can change that. And then third, on technology, we think about technology as sort of automatically sort of taking out sort of automating tasks, but actually one of the great things we can use the technology for is to understand where someone knows something and has gaps and how to fill them, and how to accelerate the path to mastery. And the potential of this is just being tapped. I think it's starting to be tapped pretty well at the very highest end. If you think about Guild, the sort of the kind of the sort of top coder, the sort of the world of how do you demonstrate what you can do at the top end, but that's not really gotten to the middle, and it could. So that's another thing. So just third thing, there's solutions. And onto the next slide. So Opportunity at Work is leading one of our first initiatives is called Tech Hire, and that is where in a community, we're trying to get to, we've got 21 communities working with us, trying to get to at least 1/3 of the IT employment in that labor market to agree to hire for some portion of their jobs based on mastery. So in other words, if you can do the job, you can get the job, including like changing job descriptions, right, for the job postings to reflect what can you do. And just as you've automated the existing practices, we're trying to make it as automatic as possible to do it the better way. So we're working with partners like the major resume screeners to say if a company wants to turn off the history and turn on the competency, right, and the mastery, how can you make that easy? We're working with LinkedIn and Glassdoor and sort of all of the big players there. We're working with Corporate Executive Board to create best practice modules for companies on how to do this, and many other partners besides, including a bunch of them locally. So here's one example. Actually, Yes We Code is one in the Bay Area, but Launch Code, which started in St. Louis. What Launch Code does is it works with companies that have these IT needs, helps them actually get their job descriptions right, and then works with people in the community who actually, it's not actually a training program. It's mainly going to people who know how to do this work. So LaShawna Lewis, she's in St. Louis. She's from East St. Louis. She went to college for a year as a computer science major. She had to drop out, family problems, money problems, in computer club at high school. She's got edX. She's like good, right? They found her, and last year about 150 other people like her, and placed them in MasterCard and Boeing and like lots of very good companies with very high standards, and they're all re-upping to do more. And the key to it is that they know you have to get quality, but you don't define quality by someone's history. It's like, what can you actually do? And they have that match. They have a 90% kind of placement rate for IT apprentices, and then the companies almost all like take these people on sort of full-time then after 3 months or 4 months. So 21 cities with 130,000 open tech jobs are going for this. And we have about 400 employers signed up right now. And that's a big opportunity to be a part of it. And you want to be a part of it not just because it's good for LaShawna and it's good for the community, but on to the next slide. It turns out it's good for your bottom line too. So here's an example from, this is a company called Catalyst IT Services. Catalyst started out, they were trying to actually sell software to HR departments and IT departments to hire based on mastery. They weren't trying to build an IT business, but they couldn't convince enough companies to sort of hire this way. They said, well, you're showing us people who worked at Pizza Hut. Like, how can that possibly be right? It's because they can code. It's like, okay. So they started their own IT outsourcing company. And they, using their own methods, hiring people, they have cast a very broad net. They post their jobs on Craigslist, among other places. They indeed do hire people who have worked at Pizza Hut as their last job. They're not biased against people with college degrees and elite credentials, but it's about 50% kind of full college degrees. 40% have neither college nor community college degrees. They started in Baltimore. By the way, they started in Baltimore. 26% of Metro Baltimore is African American. 25% of their coders are African American. Okay, they're competing not on sort of application maintenance, but on product development. You know, they did Nike's, you know, the product, that's sort of the data feedback from your shoe or whatever it is. I mean, they are doing high-end stuff. They doubled in revenue last year, and very importantly, they hire about 15 out of 1,000 people, right, that apply. It's very elite, but it's elite based on what can you actually do. And they have only a 13% turnover each year compared to like 40 to 50% for competitors, because they're giving people jobs at what they can do, the high end of their range. And as a result, they have operating margins that are twice as high as their main competitors, okay? They are arbitraging other people's bias, right? Because bias is costly. And like actually seeing through and like not letting your view of like, what does a great programmer look like? Right? Where has a great programmer been? And just make it, who is a great programmer and how do you know? They're making a lot of money doing that. And I think a lot of businesses could do a lot better, not only to fill their skills gap, but actually to do it better than the way they're doing it now.
Thank you. Sounds awesome. So Hope, you're on boards of companies that he wants to convert.
Exactly.
You have been on boards of not-for-profits that are focusing on this problem, and you're on boards and involved with for-profits that are focusing on this problem. Tell me what's working and what's not working.
So the first thing is we got to get more people educated. So I don't care whether we have to get them educated younger or we got to get them educated if they choose not to go to college, or we have to get them educated after college. Right before this was a cyber panel. We've got, you know, in the boardroom, we have cyber understanding that we all have to focus on. Jackie made a really great point that 48% of her employees, right, are computers, CS. It's an amazing, amazing stat. We know we need more coders. So the only thing I know to do as a board member and as a ex-banker is diligence. So I sort of immersed myself in the problem, okay? Where do we start? Do we start at the younger age? How do we get it into summer programs or high schools? And I went on the board of Girls Who Code. And then my son, who was an East Asian Studies major, he said, what am I gonna be? And he got turned into a technologist and became an applied math and CS major, and completely converted me to saying that 9 out of 10 kids that major in computer science had exposure early on. So how do we start to pull them all the way through? And then what happened to that kid who had no exposure? And what happened if they had a dead-end job? How do we change the situation? So I got involved with the Flatiron School, whose model was to a 3-month intense boot camp on coding to teach somebody where they had a 100% placement rate into an engineering job. It's a pretty amazing statistic. You go to school, you got, you know, for 3 months and you got a job. Some of them had lost jobs. Some of them had, you know, had dead-end jobs. How do we change that part? So I did it from that side. And then on the not-for-profit side, I'm spending a lot of time in New York City with Fred Wilson in CSNYC, where we are sort of an incubator of ideas.
What's CSNYC? Computer
Science New York City. We will work with the city. We have 2 high schools that are computer science focused. We co-invest in after-school projects, et cetera. Our view in AFSI and BASE, the Academy for Software Engineering, not every kid is going to go to college, okay? Not every child is going, some might go to a great college, some might go to a 2-year college, some might go right to work. But we're going to give them the skills for to get employment. And that is really, really important. And lastly, and computer science is really hard. I don't know how many people in this room has taken computer science. It's really hard. I took Java last fall because my son sort of guilted me into it. He's like, if you're going to study the field, you have to do it. So he was the teacher, and you know, I was the student. Not a good role. I tweeted a picture of me in the last row of the classroom. He's like, Mom, you're not paying attention, are you? I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard, okay? Computer science is hard, okay? People drop out because it's hard. How do we pull them through? How do we educate them? And what are the basic solutions in up and down from all ages?
But I think it's also, yes, it's hard. And it's been a long time since I did coding, but I did. But Byron's point about employer behavior, we've got to get the bias out of the employers, or they're going to turn into corporate leavers. It's just another group. But there are different ways to teach computer science.
Correct.
Dan Garcia at UC Berkeley changed the title of the introductory CS course to the joy and beauty of computing. And he didn't change the course, he changed the title. And for the first time, the majority of students who enrolled in the intro CS class at UC Berkeley are girls, right? The Level Playing Field Institute for 12 years has been running a summer math and science honors academy for low-income kids of color, half girls since day one. These are kids from 40, 50, 60% dropout rate high schools. We teach computer science and to kids who are otherwise written off by everybody. And they do great. And they do it in teams, and we have engineering design classes, and we get them to solve real problems. So totally heartbreaking. They'll build an app that layers on real-time crime data onto GPS data so they can walk home from school safely to avoid real-time gang violence, right? And if you never had to avoid that as a kid, if that never crossed your mind till this moment for yourself or for your kids, that's the gap we have. That's the meritocracy we don't have.
There's, you know, I will say there's some green shoots in some of the interviewing issues. Because because I think a lot of the larger tech companies in the Valley, when they do interview, they interview and actually have people produce their product, their code. And so that is a pretty substantive part of the process. And so in the world where that is the case, one would argue that a lot of the tech companies are actually achieving what you're trying to do, albeit through a different means, which is show your product and there you go.
And I think they've gotten much better at that. The question is who gets to be in the room to show their code? Like what screening has happened before and on what heuristics? That I think
I
is the
agree with
question.
you, because we'll still get to the same problem, which is pipeline. Which is when you go to look at the number of people who graduate from top CS schools, you're narrowed down to a very small pipeline of people.
So that brings us to you. So we searched long and wide to find a corporate executive in a corporation where there was actually diversity at all levels of the corporation, and we found Jackie. So yes, thank you, Yahoo. Thank you, Yahoo. So how, I mean, you guys are obviously practicing what you preach. The 48% number is huge. How in the hell are you doing this?
Well, I can't say we're perfect, but what I will say is you start with leadership, and I look at our board. Our board has 30% women, but it's a female-male issue as opposed to a diversity issue. And then from a leadership point of view, 35% of our executives are female. And so I think that statistic is a great statistic, and it's not something we actually set out to do. I think it's just something that happened based on the people who became available that we thought quite highly of and who we thought were capable of being in those positions. And so even though it is 35%, it would be great if it were better, and it would be great if it were better across all dimensions of diversity. I think the most important thing we focus on is really what's the environment for success. And at Yahoo, we're most focused on making sure from a culture you have a meritocracy where people can succeed, where you have environments where, people whose success as a coder, as a technologist, is the skill that drives their success as a company, not as opposed to whether they're green, yellow, blue, brown, or otherwise. And so we're very focused on making sure that culture is what creates success rates where we see them. I do think, this issue of pipeline, I think, is frankly the biggest issue. When we interview at 19 schools across the United States, for example. They're all the top CS programs in the country. And when you have 17% of graduates and even a smaller number of master's and then PhD programs in terms of total number of diverse candidates, it really makes that pool narrow, and so you end up competing for a very small number of people. And if there were one thing I know I certainly would like to change, it's how to evolve that pipeline and really make people appreciate how much fun it is to enjoy the environment and enjoy product development, engineering, and the myriad of opportunities there are in technology. Because I think without that exposure, nobody's going to even think about it, and it's going to seem like this scary field that is more elite than it really should be.
Yeah, and so she just said culture. That you're up, Jamal. So, so talk to us about what does that mean?
Sure. Among the people up here, I'm probably the one that is the least involved and invested in a day-to-day basis in terms of technology and a technology company. I'm a media guy, and I've been in political campaigns and all that sort of stuff. But what we do learn is how do you move people to a goal, right? Like, what is it that gets people to decide? Political campaigns are tough because they're binary. It's a 1 or a 0. You win, and if you come in second, you get nothing. So how do you get people to show up at a certain day at a certain time to do a thing that you need them to do? And a lot of that is understanding what their motivations are and how they are going to move and why. So I think about success as a cycle. Jesse Jackson once said success is a stool based on 3 legs, right? Skill, will, and opportunity. I would add a 4th leg, which is reward. Right? People need to see that there's a reward for the work that they've done. That helps then power the next level of will and skill. So, but I want to focus in on this will question. And when I think about the will question, there's nothing more important for making it through all these things than will and persistence. So Jim Shelton, who's on panels yesterday, a lot of people here know him, told me 37% of students who start in a computer science degree will finish, or in a STEM degree, will finish with a STEM degree, right? If you look at, I think, the 2013 numbers from the Computer Research Association, I can't remember the name of it, but you got about 15,000 people who finished with computer science bachelor's degrees in 2013. About 2,100 women, about 700 and change Latinos, about 550, 540 African Americans, right? So you're talking about really small numbers. I want to get more people both finishing when they start, but also increase the denominator, get more people at the bottom who are focused on this and who are getting in, and how do we do that? As somebody who is focused on politics, government is something that's not going to solve this problem. Government can help you get more skills. Government can help you open up doors of opportunity. It can make sure people get the right rewards for the opportunities that they get. But will is something that kind of happens in a social, familial, cultural context, right? The choices that people make. And when you're a kid, those tend to be the adults who are around you, your parents, your family, your teachers, your faith tradition, any other adults who are around you. As you get a little bit older and you become a teenager, those start to be your friends, right? Your friends tend to have as much or more impact on your day-to-day choices and what you're thinking about as the adults in your life, and then sometimes the media. And then maybe you want to impress yourself. I think about being a kid and erecting a ramp on the sidewalk when I was probably about 12 years old to jump over my 6-year-old brother as he laid on the sidewalk, and then get asked the question why. The only answer was because I wanted to see if I could do it, right? And so wanting to see if you can do it also powers you through some of these things. So when I think about millennials, very often when people talk about millennials, we talk about them like they dropped out of the sky, right? And we focus on all the things that people who are older think are wrong with them. But these kids were raised by people, right?
In this room.
And some of them in this room.
I got a few of them. I got a few of them.
Right? And so if they become this way because of how they were nurtured and raised, we can also nurture good things that we want. They've got strengths and weaknesses. And so here's what I've learned since I've started really focusing on this and doing research. Family, I've been traveling up and down on the East Coast, going to colleges in rural Georgia and Virginia, Georgetown University, talking to students. And what I've seen is that they will work really hard if they believe in the goal. If I drive past a basketball court every night on my way home from school, I see kids out there shooting baskets until the sun goes down. My niece, who thought she wanted to be for a while a fashion designer, I took her to meet an African-American fashion designer in New York. She got to sit and draw a piece of jewelry and be a part of a photo exhibit. She spent months after that turning her bedroom into a design studio, reading about it. She created a blog, was focused on it every night. So kids will work hard if there's something that they think that they can do. They'll also take risks. And so what we've learned is some really key things about young people. They're intersectional racially. They actually believe they want everybody to be in the picture and at the table when things are happening. They're creative. My brother's been a middle school principal. He said he's got kids who struggle with math, but they can design sneakers on their cell phones in 15 minutes for you. They just don't realize that skill they have is something that they could make, $100,000 a year or more working with somebody else.
So I think you're giving us the idea that apprenticeships, which is what he talked about, are super important.
Role
models are important, but there's something else that's important. What else is important is the network, right? Is having the peer network. 2 years ago when I was here, Gautam Chopra talked about when he started Liquid Comics that he did it because he wanted to help convey values to Indian American kids who were under the age of 20 and they didn't have indigenous Supermans and Batmans, right? Gina Davis talked about the STEM work that she does around Hollywood scripts and getting kids to focus on that. So people do need the role models, but then they also need the networks of friends. I interviewed a woman for a TV show named Monique Nelson, who's the CEO of Uniworld Advertising, and Monique also is on the board of the Posse Foundation. And what they figured out is that kids who come from tough, low-income environments, when they go off to school, they are not like the other kids, even some of the other black kids. You think about the kids, the Huxtable kids in college, or the Obama girls, sitting next to a kid who's from a parent, who's a bus driver, right? They don't necessarily have a lot in common other than the color of their skin. So posse makes sure that they're disconnected from the kids they're in school with, they're disconnected from the kids they come from, and it makes sure they have a posse of people who can relate. We started something called crate.com. It's CR Roman numeral 8. Isaac Madrid is my business partner who's sitting there in the hat. And what we figured out was these kids also don't want to be nerds. They don't want to be geeks, and sometimes the language that we use when we talk about success in this field deters kids in the neighborhoods that we're trying to get them to choose, deters them from getting into the game. And so we've got to find ways to surround them, let them know, you know what, you can be popular, you can get dates, you can make money, you can do all the things that people want to do in life in this field, and you don't have to go off and put on a pair of glasses and wear a plaid shirt in order to do it.
So question for all of you. I mean, the numbers that we're talking about is 1.5 million. This isn't like clubs. This is a big number. So my question is, what are we going to do to get to the big number?
So I would do two things, one of which is super politically unpopular. The second is just not something the government has done, and both of which involve the government. One is immigration reform. And so when I look at the impact of limiting skilled laborers into the United States and what it does to technology productivity in the United States, I think it's unfortunate that the government doesn't change their policy to enable technology companies to bring incredibly talented workers from around the world into the United States. And frankly, those workers are usually as diverse as you can possibly imagine. Yep. And then they plant roots, they build families, they pay taxes. I think that's one issue that has been so mired in a blue-red political debate that it's unfortunate, because I think everyone could agree on the skilled point of view that it's really having an impact on the U.S. economy. The second thing I would do is change when the school curriculum starts teaching coding. Right. And if exposure is 90% of the game, then we shouldn't be in a position where only 2,100 high schools in the United States out of 42,000 teach anything computer science related. And so, I look at places like New York City and Silicon Valley, where I happen to be from, and I see the opportunities that my children are given with robotics labs and coding, and I think they're absolutely, it's absolutely inculcated in their community, and they don't even realize how unusual that is relative to where I grew up, which was a fairly poor community. And I think once you provide exposure in core curriculum, that level of exposure and peer emphasis on doing those classes as part of your core curriculum will make a big difference in changing the pipeline.
See, I want to add here, because I think what you also have are that there are other things other than coding. And I think we have to be focused on the fact that a lot of these kids can go off almost immediately and get into the designing. They can start their own companies, so entrepreneurship is a place to start. And so we look at design and entrepreneurship as the entry drugs, right? Like if you get hooked on that, then that will start you down a path that then creates, and more people will do it. And if you start to have kids who make money, who come from neighborhoods like the kids that we're trying to reach, when they go back home, everybody's going to want to know how they made money. That will then get some 12-year-old kid who is now interested into getting into one of these programs and to going further, faster, and creating things that none of us can even really imagine. So I think we have to broaden the discussion beyond just coding if we really want to have a cultural change that's going to happen for this generation.
Totally agree.
I think we also, I'd modify your H-1B, your immigration reform proposal. The people that come on H-1Bs are and are not diverse. They're not the kind of diverse of the U.S. Who's going to be the majority in the U.S. soon. I'm all for increasing the number of H-1Bs as long as we increase the price tag by at least 10x per H-1B visa, and that money goes directly to make sure that the things that your kids have, every public school in America has. So let's use the H-1B, the cost of H-1B, to fund robotics labs and computer labs and design labs in every low-income public school.
But if I don't get a government policy change tomorrow, tell me what else we're going to do.
Well,
So I think we have to build supplemental programs. I mean, Girls Who Code, we built a summer program. Flatiron now has a high school program that gives scholarships. Either the way we set it up, which was really smart, I think, biased, of course, was that some kids have other after-school activities. So it's a same curriculum Monday through Friday, and then on the weekend. So if you played a sport and a sport was really important to you and you couldn't miss practice, maybe you can come on a Sunday. It's the same curriculum. So we've got to be flexible in curriculum. We've also got to start funding those that make a difference, that are impactful. Not just the guys that are putting up the nice signs, but the guys that are on the ground.
How do we know that?
So I think the answer is you've got to see the people that are on the ground doing the work, okay? There's a lovely little corporation called Scripted. She basically gets volunteers from engineers to go and help in inner city schools and teach after school coding, okay?
Right.
Great. Nobody knows about her, okay? She has $1 million of funding. We should all help. We've all got to figure out how we can be impactful and be agnostic to one single solution, but a variety of students, because there isn't one secret sauce. And I like to say, our job is to put not-for-profits out of business, okay?
Yes.
Not-for-profits are not there to be in business for right. That's all of our jobs, okay? It was said to me by Ray Chambers, malaria no more. Pretty simple, okay? We should be able to solve this. So if we can't solve it with government, we've got to figure out either the pipelines into school or out of school. And
on this, first of all, everyone should keep in mind that government is us.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, government is not, government can't, it's kind of us collectively. And it's interesting, Frida, your idea about sort of charging more for H-1Bs and putting that more into training. Actually, some parts of the tech industry have actually proposed that, to their credit. I don't think they said 10 times, but still. But the point is, if you believe you want this policy change, you do have to figure out how you fund it, because just take teaching. Yep. If you're going to make computer science, part of mandatory kind of curriculum, we have a big job to train teachers to code, right? So that they can teach coding. And it turns out it's harder to teach good coders to teach well than it is to teach great teachers to code well, right? But still, either one of those is a very big job, and it's going to cost money. And so, I think we should be serious. If we're serious about that, we do need to figure out how to pay for it. But more importantly, this is a problem that actually government, I think, can do less to solve than business can, because the thing that's driving this is not the money we spend on education as much as it's the $8 trillion of payroll, right, that employers have. Like who gets screened out, who gets screened in, who gets hired, who doesn't. You talked about the pipeline to the top 18 computer science programs. Well, if we're going to rely on the top 18 computer science programs to solve this problem, we're not going to solve this problem, right? We need way more than that. So the question is there anyone outside of the top 18 computer science programs who actually could do this? My argument is absolutely there is. And so what we need actually is, the tech analogy would mean we need a better operating system. We have lots of examples of good training programs. We have lots of examples of good onboarding programs. What we don't have is a set of norms that actually function well, that really set the decision heuristics, the flow of information, the flow of funds, so that when something's working, there's a funding model for it.
I want to talk about
I want to open it up for questions in a second. So
I want to talk about,
because we could keep going forever.
An example of a couple of private sector solutions that actually talk to what you said, Byron, about the ways in which those top 17 or 18, I think, whichever it is, computer science programs are not at all unbiased. So one of the entrepreneurs in our portfolio, the company is Piazza. It's a South Asian woman, Pooja Nath Sankar is the CEO. Many kids who take computer science at all those top classes, as well as any subject that has a problem set, use Piazza. And students are on it 3 to 4 hours a night, right? So she's got data on more than 1 million kids who've taken computer science classes. So it turns out, and Yahoo and everybody else in the Valley does a lot of recruiting. It's, loves Stanford CS. Stanford is one of the worst CS programs, according to Piazza data, and she just published this in Fortune, for being sexist in those classes. That the ratio of girls ask questions at a much different rate than girls answer questions in the Piazza study group. Pooja started Piazza because she went to the Indian Institute of Technology and none of the boys would study with her. So she started a company so that no kid would ever have to study alone. That's two stories. That's the kind of K4 Capital private sector solutions, but that's also revealing really important data, because what happens when Stanford and all the rest of them, she called out Stanford as one of the worst in her article, what happens when those Stanford CS men get hired by any tech company? They behave that same way that they did in the class, and the whole system replicates itself, meanwhile calling itself a perfect meritocracy.
I think we're going to see, so opportunity at work,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say opportunity at work is working with a number of these cities. They're in different phases, and not just cities, by the way, some rural areas but labor markets. And we've seen the ability to bring together employers, actually in some places representing half of the IT jobs, with the community college, some of the more blue-collar four-year colleges, places that are actually today producing some great people. Yeah. Not all of their people, right, are up to those standards, but many are, and nobody's recruiting there, right? None of the sort of the top companies are recruiting there because they don't think they see the yield. But again, you can deploy technology so that anyone from those programs, from elite programs, self-taught, whatever, can demonstrate, are they up to the standard or not? And if they are, they can get a job. And if you do that in the market with a bunch of employers simultaneously, well, then you have a demand signal that changes the supply pipeline. So we have coding boot camps like Flatiron and others coming now to Louisville, to Delaware, to St. Louis, to places they never would have come to before, that you wouldn't have had the critical mass. The sales cycle was too long. But now, because you have a bunch of employers saying, oh no, look at the data. We do need web development here. We do need mobile development here. And in fact, you can then, if they're willing to hire, then you can bring the boot camps, because you can't get a 100% job placement rate from Flatiron if employers are only going to hire people who went to Stanford, right? So you actually got to get, and once you get that moving, well now, anybody who, now you got the reward that Jamal was talking about, right? So now people are going to start coming out of the woodwork who actually have got what it takes, but have never had that path before. Yeah. So we've got to change the way the market is working. And to say that you can do it just through education or just through job training, that's like saying we can solve this market failure from the supply side alone. Right. And if that were true, it would be the first time in the history of markets where a market failure could be solved from the supply side alone. You've got to fix the demand side dysfunction, and we can.
Right. Well, I think the good thing about the growth in the number of technology jobs across a lot of industries is that you'll see many of those companies where it may not be their core, or it is their core, and they just want to recruit from some of those places, and you'll have to see the demand from those companies that want to go and need to recruit people, and they're going to go reach down into different dynamic pools in order to go find those people. They're going to have to, because the people don't exist in the United States.
They don't exist. I mean, they don't exist, and they're not going to have choices. And what's the best thing we can do about getting you the maximum best people you can find, right?
Just create new programs. Okay, we have a first question here.
Thank you. So I rarely leave a panel feeling more afraid than when I entered, but I'm
kind of happy.
So I'm struck by just pulling together something Hope and Frida and Byron said. So computer programming's hard for grown-ups, but it's not for kids, right? Because it compounds over time. It's like, as someone who studied computer science in some of those classes at Stanford with very inclusive and welcoming people like Peter Thiel and Keith Rabway, I can say that I had started studying CS when I was a kid, because my mom was in charge of the after-school programs. I'm sure that was just coincidence. But Byron, you talk about when you talk about sort of the exposure that Lashana had in high school, I'm struck by my 7-year-old is coding in Scratch right now, and she does not find it hard. It's a free program from MIT. She draws cats that tail flick and things like it's nothing. It's modularized C++. It's dead easy, and it builds up so that by the time you're a grown up, you're not starting to learn computer science in college. You're adding a little bit of vocabulary onto a structure you've learned. And Frida, even though you have to measure people in terms of the gap, you have to get to the finish line in order to do the job. Is this the new 1,000,000-word gap? right? Is this what, I mean, is this coding is the million-word gap that we're seeing, and how do we start addressing that over time so that it's not such a hard, so we're not trying to deal with adults?
Yeah.
So I'm going to say one thing. So your children have the benefit of Scratch exposure because of you.
Computer.
Because of you.
Right.
Because of
We
you.
also we have a piece of equipment.
And you
that
have
sits-
equipment.
right.
In
Well,
some
but
of
you
our
know
in
to
some of
point
our
in that
schools,
direction.
in some of the in AFC and BASE, there are kids that literally don't want to leave school because they're afraid to go home. They don't have a computer. If they are lucky enough to have a computer, they might not have a fast broadband that they can access information when they hit a coding problem. So we've got to move it down younger. We've got to, my daughter, when she first started taking computer science, she was the only girl, okay? She was the only girl. We got to change that discussion, and we've got to push parents to push their kids. And it's hard because there are not that many parents that are technologists. So, but we got to start somewhere. And listen, I implored my daughter is a teaching assistant, okay? You got to give back. You learned, give back. So figure it out.
And remember that, as you just said, I mean, FIRST Robotics is not in all schools.
Correct.
A
Right.
lot of these things are not in all schools at all. That has to happen. Okay, we had a question back here.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So I'm Bonin, and I work for a company called Mondelez International. We used to be Kraft Foods. I'm our chief media officer. I just bring it up because we're a Fortune 50, and it'll play into my question. But first of all, I think the pieces that we're talking about, which is the pipeline into education of our youth, is crucial and definitely the priority. But I think what we haven't been talking about is there's going to be a huge attack on talent in the next 3 to 5 years that's facing Fortune 100s, and that really scares me a lot. And I think it's driven by two things. One is that over the last 15 years, we've been graduating. If you look, less than 1% of the course descriptions of the top 100 business schools even use the word emerging, digital, or social technology. So we've been graduating leadership into organizations for the last 15 years who aren't really prepared for a digital agenda. But at the same time, if you chose and you went the route of Google, Facebook, then you've built digital affluence. And all of those guys are looking over and seeing traditional organizations saying, you know what? I can do that better. And we have to ask ourselves, have we prepared the talent that sits inside of our organization to actually be competitive and actually be able to have a job in the next 3 to 5 years? And so that scares me. And I think that when we think about talent, we don't think about the massive amount of reskilling that we're going to have to do as organizations. The Google and the Yahoos of the world can hire their way to the future, but we're bringing huge talent assets along with us that we haven't really thought about how to train. And I think, that cartoon that's been generating, which says, if we train them, they will leave, but if we don't, they will stay. Like, that is the real challenge. So I'm just curious, how do we bring these type of programs into bigger organizations?
Well, and I also think it does still start at the school in some ways. Jackie and I share the same alma mater, and I've had active discussions with them about converting stat classes to data analytics, right? You're a CMO, you need data analytics, right? Yep. What are things we can have right? You want to hire data analysts, right?
So I've had this conversation with the presidents of universities, particularly historically black colleges. Right? I don't understand why every single HBCU does not have an incubator on campus that brings together students from the business school, the business program, the computer science program, the art and design program. Put them all in a room, put some Wi-Fi in there, and some advisors. University of Texas does this. You have to apply to get in with your team. You're advised throughout the entire semester. By the time you leave, you go from having a business plan to a minimum viable product. Like, we've got to start figuring out how to get into the minds of the students and using the resources to make them work.
It's worse than that. The historically black colleges, HBCUs, don't teach the kind of coding that gets hired into Silicon Valley. The kind of coding that's being taught at HBCUs gets you a job at a defense contractor. So there are a bunch of folks that are now working to solve that. There's a lot of places where innovation matters. In addition to Flatiron, we invested in a school called something called makeschool.com. It's a for-profit, but we said we're not investing until you figure out not only how to make this free, but how to support kids who need it, and not just kids, veterans, any age, for housing and things. It was started by 2 CS dropouts. In this case, that makes this a core competence for them starting a company. They've got an alternative CS degree in 2 years that alternates with paid internships, right? And the paid internships can subsidize the whole program for kids who can't pay. And that's their business model. They've also got a summer program. So they've got various levels. If you want a CS equivalent degree without any student debt in 2 years, that's now going to be possible.
Yeah.
I saw a really interesting program. You've now seen the outcome of it, but I was involved, I think it was 2010, with Mayor Bloomberg, and he started a program called Media 2020. Right. And out of Media 2020, he took a group of media executives, and I was the private equity person in New York City that he pulled together with Jeff Bucas and Martin Sorrell, who chaired that committee. And he basically said, we have a tax base problem in New York City. Traditional media will decline in terms of tax base in the city. How do I build a tax base for the long term? And we sat, we brainstormed, and we came up with 2 ideas that he implemented, which I just think is jaw-dropping in impact, which is he created a media lab in New York City, which basically brings design and technology to New York City. And he created an engineering school, and he bid it out. Yep. And lo and behold, that school will generate computer science grads in New York City that can then go and feed the city's ecosystem from a technology point of view. Because one of the interesting observations, in addition to the tax base issue, is that it's very hard to find and build certain kinds of technology companies in cities like New York because you don't have the talent base. And so you could say the same thing that you're highlighting, that where you don't have the tax or where you don't have the talent base, it really creates a problem for environments. And you have to have some people with conviction and a long-term strategic view about how do you change some of these dynamics in a really systematic way in order to disrupt the ecosystem. Because otherwise, New York City, by example, would have just skated along, and 20 years from now, they would have looked at the media businesses and realized at that point in time. And what he did, which was so incredibly brave and insightful, was change that paradigm and seed the city now so that he's rebuilding the tax base going forward. And I think programs like that are kind of fascinating and really disruptive. And I think everybody owes it to themselves to think about how you should do that as a company, as a city, as a school district, and as parents, because I see things like that that absolutely make a difference. And you know, whether it's forcing curriculums to change or forcing cities to change, you know, forcing the way companies recruit to change, you know, I think this is something everybody can change.
And I think it's hopeful. I think we will rise to the occasion. If you see it, I do think thinking about the difference between credentials and skill and talent is actually pretty important here. And we can use those terms differently. By credentials, I mean, I think it's great that they started the new tech school, the college in New York, and the new computer science program. But if we're going to solve this problem through computer science degrees, we're not going to solve this problem. Not even that problem, right, of the next 10 years. You just can't get there from here on a pure credential basis. If we want to talk about skills, we do have a skills gap. We don't have enough people with these skills. And I think it probably is true that it's harder for an adult to learn than a young person. That's definitely true than a kid. However, it's not impossible. So like, look at the numbers. There's like 70 million people in our job market for whom the jobs you're talking about is a better job. What percentage of them can actually learn it? I don't know what the answer is, but if the answer is 1%, you know, that's the many people. That's the point. But the thing is, you can get there. But I want to say the talent, that should make us optimistic, honestly. Talent is much more widely distributed than is skill or than is opportunity to gain the skill. Yeah. And if we start to look at it through that lens and say, how do we, you know, like this company I talked about, Catalyst, how do we open up the pipeline for talent to come in and have a chance to show what it can do? If we can do that systematically in government, but above all in employers, then we can solve this problem for sure.
We have a very patient question, and I know we're out of time, so you get the last question.
Oh, thanks. Well, just 2 small points. One that struck me following that, I spent a lot of time in India in the 1990s. And in India in the 90s, when many multinational companies were trying to open shop there was nobody there with the actual professional skills that those companies were looking for. And all of those companies built training facilities.
That's right.
And they took people based on potential, and they taught them the skills they needed to fill the jobs that they had.
Adults.
Adults. And
Which
it
is
strikes
what we
me
did
as
in
something
the
that
70s in the United
it
States.
strikes me as something the tech industry absolutely has the financial wherewithal to do if we wanted to, and as a potential solution for us to own. The last thing I'll just say is on the government front. Some of you on the panel know this is a bugaboo for me, but I do think there actually are some potential solutions and supports that can come from Washington. Silicon Valley has historically not engaged with Washington very consistently, and I think it's an opportunity to throw some weight behind it. It has to be a collective action, and that's my last point and question. But I know many of you are thinking about these things, but I just wondered about the training, and Jackie, maybe, I mean, you guys have been so out in front. Do you see an effort in Silicon Valley to maybe start just teaching yourself, the people on potential?
So we do focus on teaching very specific skills, but those skills are things like Android development to people who are already highly trained and need to learn a particular skill, or certain coding languages or skills within our own technology tools. And so I don't think it addresses the problem that we've been talking about here. It's really just helping apply some of the skills that we have internally to make the talent in a company like Yahoo that much better. They're also given, at the scale that we operate from a user point of view, we have 1 billion monthly uniques. At that scale, we require a highly qualified level of engineer, and then we are always training them and making sure that they can continue to learn on the job, because those skills are rare to come by.
Right, and I'm getting the session oversigned, so I want to thank the panelists, and I hope what you take out of this is that you need, if you're interested in funding from a corporate perspective, from a philanthropy perspective, there's lots of options, but please make sure that you talk to Hope, talk to Byron, talk to Frida, talk to Jamal, find out from people where we're really seeing outcomes from some of the philanthropy that's going on, so that you fund the right programs that are creating real opportunities.
And fund some entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Thanks.